together on this Shabbat morning, and I'm going to actually turn it over to Rabbi Heather Shore, whom I know you have come to know and love, to do the introduction of our speaker as they've gone to school together, and I think even as people continue to join us, we'll begin on time here. So Rabbi Shore, take it away.
Cool. I'm also only going to speak for just a second before I pass it over to Rabbi Aronson. We're in for a real treat this morning. Rabbi Aronson is the founder of an organization called Shleimut that is expanding our access and our understanding of what it means to really show up as Jewish people that honor all of the many different seasons and expressions and capabilities of our bodies, and what it means to sort of be a spiritual being in a physical body. I am going to invite us to share in the blessing for studying Torah together, and then I'll pass it over to you. Rabbi Aronson, please join with me, on or off mute, whatever feels good. Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam asher kitshanu b'mitzvotav v'tzivanu la'asok b'divrei Torah. Rabbi Aronson.
Thanks so much. Thanks for having me for the second year in a row here. It's nice to see a couple familiar faces. So I'm going to share a document in the chat that there's also a PowerPoint version that I'll share my screen and show, but this is a plain text version if that's easier to access. And then I'm going to share my screen. Here we go. I'm going to get to the right screen.
It says we need access to the Google Doc.
Oh, okay. 1 second. Sorry. Okay. Try refreshing, then you should be good. So as Rabbi Shore said, I'm Rabbi Emily Aronson. I'm the campus rabbi at NYU Hillel and started this project a couple years ago. It's been a long time in the making in terms of exploring what it means to show up with a chronic illness and a disability in Jewish space, not just physically, but spiritually. So I've spent a lot of time thinking about theology of chronic illness and disability, and the ways in which our prayers and our rituals do and do not represent who we are in our fullest selves. And so today, I want to focus in on the prayer Misha Berach, our prayer for healing, because it's one of the most confusing prayers to me personally, as someone who's not necessarily going to get better. Typically, when we think about prayers for healing, we're asking for some sort of change to occur in a person or for comfort to be brought to a person. And when I was first diagnosed with a chronic illness, I really struggled with this idea of somebody praying for me and somebody asking for God to make me better. That was my initial impression of what this prayer was about. And it wasn't until after I really took a deep dive into the prayer and different versions of the prayer and the ritual of the prayer that I really started to open my mind to the possibility that perhaps this prayer still does apply to me in certain ways. And so that's kind of where I'd like to take us today. We're going to start with a couple things to get us all on the same page. When I'm using the term disability, there's a couple different models. There's the medical model of disability that says that there is something wrong with a person and we have to fix it. That's one model. The other model is the social model that says that actually there's nothing wrong with a person with a disability. There's something wrong with society, and we need to deal with the ways in which society makes it difficult or impossible for somebody with a disability to move through the world. And so this is the model that I prefer to use, the social model of disability, thinking about how does a person move through the world and what are the ways in which society does or does not grant access. So it places the onus on society to be the ones taking responsibility for each person within society. And then when I'm talking about chronic illness, typically it's considered something to be an illness that lasts beyond 6 months. and can't necessarily be cured. I'm going to come back to this Hebrew word rofe in a second. Healing and cure are really at the crux of what, how Mishaberach gets complicated and how it gets interesting as well. So typically, when I'm talking about healing, I'm talking about the idea that like maybe it's related to the return of health, but it's also about the holistic process of finding meaning, finding acceptance, or becoming whole. Whereas cure is typically associated with the eradication of an illness or a disease, or turning something from one state of being back to its original state of being. So there are a lot of assumptions there. In Hebrew is such a concise language, we only get one word that encompasses both of these terms, rofeh. So this word rofeh is going to come up in our Mishaberach, and we're going to spend some time thinking about what does it mean that there's only one word for these two very different concepts? What are the challenges of this? What perhaps are the benefits? So these are just a couple of different terms that I'll read out that are associated with healing and cure. When I do this in person, I end up having folks create a Venn diagram and having them place for themselves where these terms might fit in a Venn diagram of healing and cure. So as I read through these, think about where you might place them. Fix, medication, spiritual, whole person, support, problem, acceptance, journey, process, loss, solution, doctor, accommodations, treatment, before and after, and wellness. So these are just some terms. This is one version of a possibility of where I've kind of put these terms of these terms on the left being ones related more with healing, in my opinion. The ones on the right being more associated with cure, and the ones in the middle kind of floating somewhere in between and perhaps applying to both. As I was going through, were there any words that stood out to you that were like, oh, I don't know what to do with that word, or actually this is something that I haven't encountered before? Okay, keep it in the back of your mind as we go through our first text. So the Mishaberach itself kind of has ambiguous origins. There isn't really like one Mishaberach that is the traditional Mishaberach. So this is the closest thing to the standard traditional Mishaberach for healing. There are also Mishaberach blessings that are used after somebody has an aliyah to the Torah, after they've read from the Torah or done the blessings. And so it's used in different contexts. This is one fairly standard text. Okay. I'm going to read it in the English here. May the one who blessed our ancestors, Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, Sarah, Rebecca, Rachel, and Leah, bless and heal those who are ill. Now, heal here is using the term, it's really just bless those who are ill. Okay. And then folks would share names of those they're thinking of. May the Blessed Holy One be filled with compassion for them, for their recovery, healing, and strength. May God swiftly send them a complete healing of the soul and healing of the body, soon and without delay. And let us say, Amen. Looking at just the text of this prayer without thinking about the ways in which it may be received or sung or used in a ritual capacity, what do you make of the idea that healing of the soul is separated from healing of the body?
Can you just want to speak? I think that's beautiful. that that the acknowledgement that there are at least those two aspects of us, and thinking more as you age and the body starts to ache and do things that you don't like, knowing that that part of you is the soul, can be helpful.
I think the healing of the body is more related to cure, and the healing of the soul is more related to healing.
What are the implications of that?
What are the implications? Well, I think, particularly in these times that we're living, we need healing of our soul. Even if our bodies are healthy, our souls aren't very healthy these days. I shouldn't say our, but
But I think that's also getting back to the point of chronic illness, or even of terminal illness, is that there may in fact be a point at which they are also separate, because we may recognize that the body is not going to be healed. Again, that we're not going to have a recovery of the body, but there's no reason to believe that we cannot have a recovery of the soul. In essence, you're kind of, you may be able to cure your soul of the suffering that it is in. You may not be able to cure your body of the problem that it is in.
So what does it mean here when it says that we're asking for a complete healing? So we have healing of body, we have healing of soul, and also we're asking for a complete healing.
Something that I find, it's something that I find, because of what I do, I actually find that to be a troublesome thing. So I'm a psychologist, and one of the areas that I most work in is adjustment to chronic disease. So actually, I find it very troubling to not look at acceptance of something. So I just personally find like essentially, if I'm believing in a kind of a miraculous God who is literally, sort of laying on of hands sort of idea, and is going to completely heal things, I see this as being written by a people who lived in a time when you either lived or died, so that there really wasn't a concept of the internal workings of the body. And so essentially, if you lived from whatever ailment you had, then you were completely healed. And if you died, then you weren't. And these people were not dealing with chronic disease, frankly.
Interesting.
So I think that complete healing, especially with shlemut as the word, which is wholeness, can include what Mark talks about, acceptance. Complete healing in that respect doesn't have to be returned to the state of health that you were in when you were 25, but to be complete as you are.
So this bigger picture notion of healing as this acceptance and kind of stillness with where you're at. So we've looked at the text itself. The other piece of Mishaberach is the enactment of the prayer, of turning the prayer into a ritual. When in a synagogue, perhaps the rabbi, perhaps the cantor, perhaps the spiritual leader gets up and says, we're now at the point in our service where we have the Mishaberach. We're going to share names aloud of those that we're thinking of who are ill. The prayer is chanted. There's a spot for people to share their names. What does it mean to ask God for a complete healing for someone else? What are we actually asking for? Or if you have had somebody say this prayer for you, what has been your experience of being prayed for in this context?
I'm sorry, I want to speak again. So in 2016, I had registered for a program called Torah Yoga and Hiking Boots, which is where we went to Israel with a guide and a yoga teacher who taught also Jewish mysticism. And a month before the trip, I was in physical therapy. I walked out of physical therapy. I could barely walk. I was in so much pain. I emailed the leader, the Jewish mystic, Torah yoga teacher, and she said, I will say a refuah shlema for you. And I got better. I went to Israel. I hiked every single thing. I hiked the hardest trails. And ultimately, in 2018, I needed surgery. But from 2016 to 2018, I was pretty good. And that showed me the power of the healing prayer.
Thank you. Anyone else?
Well, my mother had Alzheimer's for 10 years, and for 10 years I said the Misha Berach, but I didn't say her name out loud because, you know, it seems like people that say names, it's always people, you know, to recover from surgery or to recover from an illness. And, you know, and there's really no recovery from dementia. So I never said it out loud because I always figured that it wasn't it wasn't, and to say it for 10 years, you know, every Friday out loud but it was just really, my prayer for her was just that she wouldn't become one of those agitated people, you know, that she would just always be comfortable where she was in her, you know, in her existence. That she would, because a lot of people do become very agitated. And so that was kind of my prayer for her, that she would just remain peaceful and not agitated. But like I said, I always had the feeling that people that said names, it was always for people that were recovering from something.
Jeannie,
Yes.
I say my mother-in-law's name who has dementia. And I do say her name, but I understand what you're saying. And what I say it for is exactly what you're talking about. It's not that I actually wish her to be not having something or think that that's what's going to happen, but more that she can have the best version of this that she can have. I think of it kind of in the concept of the purpose of hospice, even though obviously it's not hospice, it's chronic. But like the concept of hospice is you're going to die. Can you die better than other people? Can you die with grace? Can you die with certain dignity? Can you be comfortable in this thing that is going to happen to you? And that's exactly what I think about when I say her name.
It's really interesting to hear two different approaches to such a similar experience of what are we assuming that the prayer is kind of meant for? Who is it for? And also, how do we experience the prayer as the person saying the prayer? Which raises the question of who is this actually for? Are we expecting that by saying this prayer, there is going to be that kind of divine intervention aspect of we name somebody, God hears it, and God acts on this? Or is there a different purpose of the prayer in which we're taking time to reflect on the people in our lives? We're being in community with one another, and we feel heard in some way by saying the prayer itself. So we're going to continue to explore this question of who is Misha Berach for and what is the impact on us and also the people that we say it for. And we're going to continue on with our next text. And I should perhaps ask, is the Debbie Friedman version the version of Mishaberach that you typically use in your community? Okay. How many of you have just read the prayer without music? Okay, well, the rabbi. I want to take a minute and just read the prayer. Then we're going to listen to it and kind of have the experience of it. But I want to just take a minute to look at the words. So I'm going to just read it as it is. Mishaberach avotenu, mekor habracha li'imotenu. May the source of strength who blessed the ones before us help us find the courage to make our lives a blessing, and let us say, Amen. Mishaberach imotenu, mekor habracha la'avotenu. Bless those in need of healing with refuah shlema, the renewal of body, the renewal of spirit, and let us say, Amen. So one of the biggest things that I noticed once I actually learned Hebrew is that there's no translation of the words that are in Hebrew. Nothing in here is a translation. There are words that are left. The words in Hebrew are just in Hebrew, and that's it. And especially the phrase, refuah shlema, she adds this line of the renewal of body and the renewal of spirit. That's not exactly a translation. So what is the impact of having refuah shlema, this phrase that typically gets translated as a complete healing that we saw in the traditional version? What happens when we just leave the Hebrew as it is?
It has the problem of separating the world, which Reform Judaism unfortunately sometimes does, into those who speak Hebrew and those who do not. And so those who speak Hebrew can say, well, I know what that really means, and we're just not saying. It's the same problem I sometimes have when we use gendered language in Hebrew and then non-gendered language in English. It's sort of like saying Avinu Malkeinu, and I think, I know what Avinu Malkeinu means. You can translate it any way you want, but I know what it means in Hebrew.
Yes. Also a challenge that I have with a lot of our prayer books.
Not to get, just
yes.
to use an example.
For me, the Mishaberach prayer is going out to my sisters who have Alzheimer's. And it seems the prayer is a statement of myself, for myself, as a way of communicating. I still remember you. I still love you and think of you. And I wish empathy, compassion, and healing, quote unquote, even though when I speak to you, you don't know who I am. But it's just a prayer from me to her, acknowledging her, acknowledging that we were sisters and we had a beautiful life together. And even now, if there would be some way that we can connect, I'm available for support and help.
Thank you.
Could you say, I was offline when you explained what refuah shlema actually means. I was busy trying to get a copy of what's on the screen now, and I ended up, so.
Yes, so refuah shlema is the phrase that was in the traditional Mishaberach that means a complete healing, which doesn't actually get translated in this prayer. And in fact, the word healing is never used in this version of the prayer at all. What Debbie Friedman did is she took the idea, refuah shlema, and her interpretation of it is the renewal of body, the renewal of spirit. So it's not a direct translation, but it's kind of her interpretation of that phrase from the traditional blessing.
So I love all the other words that she's used in this song, because it gives you an opportunity to find healing in other ways, and not just a very strict, complete recovery, complete healing, which is often not possible, as we all know. So I remember last night when I was singing it with Rabbi Shore at services, the line, "Help us find the courage to make our lives a blessing." I mean, that always stands out to me. I can't really talk anymore, sorry.
Thank you. Thank you. I have a friend who actually has that engraved on the inside of her ring. That line, like that is the line of Judaism to her, that like encompasses all of Judaism, Jewish values, living with chronic illness. That line from Debbie Friedman is the line. And it does. It adds a sense of, I think, as we were talking about with the original prayer, there's a little bit more of a sense of cure, and this version of it really leans into the idea of healing, that our bodies could be in really any state, our minds could really be in any state, but it's the way in which we experience the world that we're seeking comfort and community and being known, that this prayer really gives voice to in a way that the traditional words don't. So now that we've looked at the prayer itself, I actually want to lean into this idea of the experience of the prayer. So I have this video of Debbie Friedman herself from 2001 at a conference of sorts. And I want us to really focus in on the language that she uses before she begins the prayer and the way in which she sings the prayer, kind of her method.
It would be really hard for me to, especially in these times, to be with so many people and to not sing the Mishberach with you. So I'm just going to do it. And I'll sing it first for you and ask you not to sing along. And then I'll ask you to join with me and to hold in your minds and hearts the names of those people in your lives in need of healing. And for all of those across the seas, all of those we don't know, and all of those for whom there is no one to ask for blessings of healing and well-being. This is for you. May the source of strength, who blessed the ones before us, help us find the courage to make our lives a blessing, and let us say Amen. This is still for you. The renewal of body, the renewal of spirit, and let us say Amen. שבירך אבותינו. מי שבירך אבותינו. מקור הברכה, מקור הברכה, לאמותינו, אמותינו. May the source of strength, who blessed the ones before us, help us find the courage to make our lives a blessing, and let us say, Amen. Mishaberach im.
Sorry. Okay, I'm gonna pause it there. To me, there's nothing like hearing Debbie Friedman herself. What stood out to you from her offering this blessing that may be different from what you typically experience or see with this prayer?
Every word was heartfelt. It was more improvised instead of just sung as a congregation by almost rote by now.
It seemed as if, and I couldn't tell, was this post 9/11? I mean, it sort of.
My question was.
Yeah, because it seemed as if she was speaking about not so much healing of physical, but really a healing of the soul, a healing of people who have experienced great loss. Almost the way she started with I sort of have to sing this right now, as if it was kind of obvious that there was great suffering.
Yeah, which is interesting because I've heard that line over and over and over, like, especially in this time. How many times do we hear that is the phrase that we use, because we experience communal tragedy over and over and over again? So that is an interesting phrase that she uses there.
And did I'm sorry, I was a little distracted by my dog, but didn't she say something before she sang it about, and let's sing it for those who don't have anybody to sing for them, or something like that?
Yeah, because so often we do this as a named prayer. And she brings into mind everyone who doesn't necessarily have someone saying their name out loud, which is similar to a lot of ways in which I hear the mourner's Kaddish kind of invoked, but not something I typically hear with the Mishaberach.
I like that.
The other thing that really stands out to me from this is the way in which she says, don't sing with me the first time. Just receive the blessing for yourselves. Let me offer this blessing to you. And it's something that I don't think we really think about very often, of what does it mean to want to put yourself on the Mishaberach list? What does it mean to want to say this prayer for yourself? And there's something very soothing about the way that she does this, especially assuming this is in the wake of a huge tragedy, of saying, whether or not you think you need healing, in this moment, everyone kind of does. We're going to take a moment as a community and think about what it means to heal as a community. And I know that I felt this kind of awkward tension of like, I actually kind of do want to, sometimes I'm like, I do want to put myself on the list, but I don't necessarily want to like tell the entire world that I'm having a really hard time right now. And I'm really not feeling well. And she grants this permission to say, you don't have to say anything, but I see you, and I know that you are hurting in some capacity right now, and you deserve to be held. And that's really special to me. That's something that I have never seen in community, and never thought to do until I saw this video of her singing. And at the same time, a lot of times the reality of services is that we don't want to spend 15 minutes on one prayer. And so we kind of do it all together. And that also gives us the opportunity of the act of doing the praying versus receiving the praying. So what she does here is she's serving two very different purposes. And so that's an interesting thing to think about, is who is the prayer for? And what do we feel when we either receive or pray? And can we do both of those at the same time? Because the reality is there could be weeks where we want ourselves to be on the list and we're thinking of somebody else. If we're doing the prayer all at once, can we receive and do the praying for other people? I'm curious if anyone has thoughts on that.
It's interesting because by your starting us out just now with reading it and reading the words, because that's, I think the other thing is that, especially if you're talking about Debbie Friedman and anything about Debbie Friedman, is trying to separate, is this a song or is this a prayer? Not that they can't be both, but Debbie Friedman is a song. I mean, we sing this. We don't even so much pray this in some ways. It's almost like this is part of this is a hymn in some way. And so I think there is something to not sing it, either to read it or to have it, or to have the cantor or the rabbi or whoever is leading the service essentially bless you. That moment where we are to receive the blessing of the service rather than to just be a participant in the service.
So I want to say that the Debbie Friedman's prayers serve multiple functions. And Sisterhood did in the film festival, I don't know, about 10 years ago, a movie about her. And she says that singing goes directly to the heart, bypassing the brain, so that the music can give you that intention and that fullness of experience, whether or not you contemplate the words. And contemplating the words is something additional.
Rabbi Aronson, I don't remember who said this, but something like, when one sings, one prays twice. So singing is praying. You can't fight me on that one.
Well, and sometimes
The cantor has spoken.
I couldn't agree more. And sometimes ritual is takes us beyond the words on the page. And then the singing is very much part of that. And that's why ritual works. And actually, I think that's the beauty and the mystery of it, is we don't always understand what's happening, but it does sort of carry us. And that's when ritual is so powerful.
I think the reason this version is the one that resonates so deeply for me is because there's something about the way the language is couched that gives me agency and feels like I'm in some way a participant of making this happen. I'm the one who's calling forth the blessed ancestors. I'm joining in a group to ask for courage, and I'm not speaking directly to a single word, Yahweh or God or anything like that. I'm able to expand the place I'm speaking to in a much larger context. Yeah.
Beautiful. So I'm gonna go out of order of my sources, which I thought might happen. Someone actually did a study on Mishaberach. Her name's Gila Silverman, and she conducted this study that she titled "I'll Say a Mishaberach for You: Prayer, Healing, and Identity Among Liberal American Jews." She did this study in Arizona, and she interviewed Reform and conservative Jews to understand what healing prayers do for them, what healing prayers do for those in their lives. And what she found overall is that Mishaberach was ultimately a prayer of connection and comfort, and that people generally felt more attached to the ritual of the prayer than the words, which is interesting. This is what we've kind of been talking about. And it was knowing that they were on a list of names that were going to be read at the synagogue, hearing their name being called off of a list, or listening to the melody of Debbie Friedman's version that actually brought them a sense of healing. Most people in the study didn't actually refer to the text of the prayer at all, but it was the feeling of the prayer that they were attached to. So here she says, people are connecting to many different things, to each other as individuals, to community, to traditions and ancestors, to God, which might mean many different things to the respondents, to dormant parts of themselves, or to some part of the experience of illness of which they were not previously aware.
Yeah.
So this really encapsulates for me this idea that words are of course important. The text wouldn't be the text. You know, we really honed in on one line that stands out. But it doesn't matter to most people that, oh, some of it's in Hebrew and it's not translated. Or, oh, this prayer doesn't actually use the word healing. But it's the experience of the prayer itself. And I find it really interesting that people experience it as a prayer of comfort and connection, that they don't use the word healing. And that is actually a huge part of chronic illness and disability, is combating isolation that can come along with the experience of illness so often. And that what this prayer does is, whether or not people are using the word healing, the acts of connecting to one another and finding comfort is something that is healing in and of itself. And so kind of looking at this expanded version of healing as the ultimate goal of the Mishaberach versus asking for divine intervention or a cure or direct action in some capacity. Barry. Yeah.
This social aspect that you're talking about, I have an experience that I could share briefly, and that is often when I go into a synagogue to pray, and this prayer appears, I have a very close connection to someone who has a serious mental illness, and when it's time to say the name of that person, I don't feel safe in that community to speak that name out loud because of, I've explored why that is, but for various reasons about the feeling that community can really hold that person or wants to hold that person. So I don't speak it out loud. And so I guess that just points a finger at something that's there here. And you were talking about isolation, I think.
And that also raises the question of who has the permission and authority to name someone as ill. And there are people who prefer to not have everyone know what they're going through and what happens when somebody says their name out loud without their permission. Right. So there's a real delicate balance there of what it means to name someone, and the flip side of that is how it impacts you as the person offering the prayer, because part of what we're seeing here is that it is also, there is power in offering a name, but part of what that power is actually for you. Because then what happens is everyone else in the community looks and says, oh, that person is thinking of somebody that's close to them. Perhaps they're a caregiver. Perhaps they're experiencing some sort of loss in their life and how they relate to somebody who is ill. Maybe I should check on them as the caregiver, as the concerned friend. And so there's a dual aspect here of what the naming itself does that can be really challenging when you want to respect somebody's privacy. Of how do you indicate to the community, I'm actually having a hard time as the friend of a loved one, the caregiver of somebody, but I don't want them to be named explicitly. And so I don't have a solution to that, but that's a really important thing to think about, is how are we expressing to our community when we're in the caregiver position, without
Outing.
violating somebody's privacy.
Thank you.
Thank
I
you.
think this sounds like it brings up, again, going back to that question of whether we use the word disability or illness or whatever, is when we name somebody, you're right, is it our right to name somebody, but it also is, there are so many different ways in which we could say a Mishaberach for, I could say a Mishaberach for, a child losing their tooth. I could, I could say a Mishaberach for someone who is battling a transient problem, or someone who broke their leg, or I could be saying a Mishaberach for someone with Alzheimer's, or for someone with other kinds of psychiatric issues or things. It's much easier in one respect when we say Yartzeit. It's like if we announce that someone's dead, dead is dead. Illness is so vague that you're right. I think it brings up, do we want to announce that person? And then the judgments that I know from what I do that incur, in which, do people think that this person's problem is worthy? Which I'm not suggesting that I'm not supporting that. I'm just saying that once I name someone, now the question becomes, so what do they have? And then there's the judgments about what their disability or their ailment is, which again, I think makes it hard to want to name that sometimes.
Yeah, thank you. Anne.
Do you know if Debbie Friedman had received her own diagnosis when she wrote this song?
I don't know. That's an interesting question. I don't know. Lynn?
Hi, I lead Minyan every night, Temple Bethel from home. And I have been asked to names for the Mishabera, but not to say them or write them in the chat. I just say them in my heart and not out loud to honor the request. Others have asked me to add them to the list. I do type them in the chat, that some for me and people who are.
Having a little trouble hearing you.
Oh, is that better?
Yes.
Okay, sorry, I'll start again. I lead the daily mingling for Temple 5 or 6 nights a week. Been asked to add names, say them out loud, or put them in the chat. So those names I hold in my heart during the Misha Bera, but others who have requested I add names to the list, type the specific name into chat so people can see if they choose to look at the chat.
Thank you. Yeah, so it's like different levels of visibility. And what does it mean to ask for your name to be added to a list, versus I think, Barry, a little bit of what you were saying, of saying, like, I know that there's somebody in my life who's ill, but they haven't necessarily asked me to add them. So what's the balance there? And how do we honor both of those situations? Bruce.
Well, when I said the Mishaberach, seldom do I actually say names, but if someone's in my conscience, I have this feeling that, we have silent prayer, and God knows who I'm thinking of. So it works for me that way.
Thank you. Great. Just lost my train of thought. I had this other source in here. That's from Mordecai Kaplan. And he's responding to a question from a child who asks, why did God make polio? So what this question raises is this idea of, if God creates the world and God acts wondrously, and we have prayers that praise God for creating humans perfectly, why does illness exist? Why does disability exist? Why do bad things happen to good people? This kind of Harold Kushner eternal question. I'm going to read through the source. I think it complicates a lot of the ways that I find this source particularly challenging. And I invite you to think about the ways in which this interacts with this prayer for healing. Apologies that it's a little long. God did not make polio. God is always helping us humans to make this a better world, but the world cannot at once become the kind of world he would like it to be. Forgot to mention, God uses masculine language, or Mordecai Kaplan uses masculine language for God. I'm going to leave it in the original. When men make use of the intelligence God gave them, they learn more and more the laws of health, by which all kinds of illness can be prevented or cured. When the doctor relieves your pain, when he helps you to get back more strength and better control over your muscles, it is with the intelligence that God gives him. When you use braces and other devices that help you get around and do some of the things you want to do, their manufacture is due to the intelligence and the concern for your welfare that God puts into the minds of those who make the devices. Do not feel that God does not care for you. He's helping you now in many ways, and he will continue to help you. Maybe someday you'll be restored by his help to perfect health, but if that does not happen, it is not because God does not love you. If he does not grant you all that you pray for, he will find other ways of enabling you to enjoy life. Be thankful to God for all the love and care that people show toward you, since all of that is part of God's love, and do not hesitate to ask God for further help. If the people around you are intelligent and loving, that help will come to you. So what are some of the themes around healing and cure and or other conversations that are standing out to you from this text? Mark.
Not surprisingly, came from Mordecai Kaplan. That's why he does not believe in, and I think to some extent we often do not believe in, an omnipotent God. Obviously, this gets, if there is an omnipotent God and an omnipotent God creates things that kill and harm people, then that God is cruel. Then it's hard. This basically suggests that God is a guide, that God doesn't so much make the world as much as God puts things in the world that people can use God's gifts to create goodness out of them, in essence.
Yeah.
But it definitely requires that God's not omnipotent for this to make sense.
Yes. Do you see God in healthcare professionals and doctors and medicine and mobility aids?
I hope so.
Yeah, I love this piece at the end, right? If the people around you are intelligent and loving, they will come help you, right? That there's almost this sort of implicit awareness that it's we people who have stigmatized these things as being like undivine or broken, right? And that the true sign of like a divine wisdom amongst us is our ability to show up for one another, right? And to show up and help when that help is needed, or to offer support, or to create those supports. I love that sort of sense of like, there's nothing wrong with you. You might just be surrounded by like condemned people. It feels like a very Jewish approach, and one that's kind of comforting, I think.
It's actually the only sentence that I understood. I can't, by the end of it, I said, please bring back Debbie Friedman.
Renee.
I like this
Mordecai Kaplan's interpretation of God, because that's exactly how I feel, that he gave us the intelligence to do things. He's not sitting up there controlling everything we do like some religions believe. He gave us the ability to be good. He gave us the intelligence to help others. We just don't always do it, unfortunately.
So if we take Kaplan's idea here, what does it mean when we say a Mishaberach? How does God answer prayers? Where is God in Mishaberach under Kaplan's idea here? Renee.
He gives us the strength and the courage to be able to do what we have to do. I wish I had known the Mishaberach when my husband was dying, because I'm just coming back to Judaism late in life. And I was just basically going along. I still believe that there's only one God. So I still felt like I was still Jewish, but I wasn't observant and I wasn't going to temple. And I wish I had known that prayer for my husband also.
Thank you, Renee. Sorry for the dog barking in the background. So I'll say that one of the when I first read this text, I had some trouble, especially with this second paragraph of like, well, if God doesn't restore you, it challenges so many biblical texts that are rooted in an idea of sin and punishment, where you do something wrong, God punishes you, typically in the area of your body through which you sinned. You do something wrong, God causes illness. And the implications of that then are, if you don't get better, it means that God still sees you as a sinner. And that's so much of what our biblical and rabbinic texts say about illness and disability, is that it's rooted in sin. And so I had a really hard time with this text of actually turning that notion on its head and saying, God's actually not responsible for the state of your body in a way that our rabbinic sages have thought of it. God actually doesn't have that kind of active role. And instead, it's really on the people around you. And that also brings up a lot of trouble, because there's so many people who don't have access to doctors and healthcare and supportive family and friends. And so I had a hard time also with this idea of this last line of, if the people around you are intelligent and loving, that help will come to you. Like, there's actually a lot of people who live alone. And we really saw this during the height of the pandemic, of people being really isolated and not knowing who to turn to. And so I really struggled with this text at first. Ultimately, it comes back to me, this social model of disability, of it's on everyone to be looking out for each other. And how do we create systems that are there to catch people at their most vulnerable? Mark.
Yeah, because it sort of implies, again, it's very judgmental. I mean, to be honest, you could have very smart, loving people around you who still lack the financial resources, or there's a lot of reasons why you're not getting this help that is not because you're surrounded by stupid people who don't care about you. I mean, I think it oversimplifies the sort of concept. I like the idea that it says that if God, it's not that God doesn't care, but God is in your medicine, God is in your wheelchair, God is in God is in lots of people doing powerful things. But God, it doesn't sort of want to deal with the idea that how come God doesn't do this for everybody, in essence. And is there a judgment on in this case, not a judgment on your moral failings, but essentially implying that the people around you have moral failings? And that isn't really a nice thing to say either. Like, if you don't have these things, you must be surrounded by people who have moral failings. And that's not a really.
Yes, that is kind of why I initially struggled with this. And I've come around to the ideas that were expressed at the beginning of actually this is the ultimate expression of divine love, of putting trust in one another to take care of one another. And that ultimately we have the capacity to do good for one another and provide this larger sense of healing for one another. I would say, especially with the American healthcare system, we have a very long way to go. But that God gave us the capacity to do that, and also to show up for one another in ways that don't actually require that much of us. That just showing up and being present for somebody and offering a prayer, a blessing, sharing the name of a loved one, that is also the ultimate act of healing and participating in this kind of communal healing that doesn't require divine intervention in a kind of traditional sense, that God acts through us, and that we can kind of carry out that capacity for healing by the ways in which we interact with one another. So I want to do a couple of things now. So I know that you traditionally end with Mishaberach, which seems fitting for this session. So I'd like to, because Debbie Friedman has been very popular, I'd like for us to go back to Debbie Friedman, and then I'd also like to offer an additional blessing after that. But I want to make sure that there's time, especially given our conversations, to invite you to think about people in your life. Perhaps it's yourself, perhaps it's your loved ones, perhaps it's somebody who has a very curable illness, perhaps it's somebody who has dementia, perhaps it's someone that you're thinking and wishing was close to you now, but you'd like to hold space for them. And I invite you, in whatever way feels best to you, to either share their name aloud, to share them in the chat, or to hold them in your heart. And I'd like you to receive this blessing, or to participate in this blessing in the way that feels best to you. If you'd like to unmute and sing along, if you would like to sit and receive, if you would like to be on mute and sing, I invite you to receive or participate in the blessing in the way that feels best to you. Mishaberach Avotenu Mekor Bracha Leimotenu. May the source of strength, who bless the ones before us, help us find the courage to make our lives a blessing, and let us say, Amen. Mishaberach Imotenu Mekor habracha leavotenu. Bless those in need of healing with refuah shlema, the renewal of body, the renewal say Amen. I'd like to close with an additional blessing. This is a blessing that I wrote for disabled and chronically ill Jews during Jewish Disability Awareness and Inclusion Month. And this is based off of the three-part structure of the priestly benediction of Birkat Kohanim. And so it blends the traditional Hebrew with some additional blessing. Yevarechecha Adonai v'yishmerecha. May God bless you and keep you. May you be reminded of your inherent holiness, for you were created B'Tselem Elohim in the image of God. May you feel enveloped by the sacred energy of the universe. May you be included, celebrated, and honored, not just this month, but every month. Ya'er Adonai panav elecha v'chuneka. May God's light shine upon you and favor you. May Or HaChaim, the light of life, course through you, filling you up from within. May Shekhinah, the indwelling presence, accompany you on your journey. May Hamakom, the place, help you feel a sense of home and hope. Yisa Adonai panav elecha ve'yasem lecha shalom. May God's countenance be raised towards you and grant you peace. May others treat you with respect, kindness, dignity, and true allyship. May this month of being centered encourage pride in your identity, self-discovery, and solidarity. May you experience moments not only of shalom, peace, but also of shlemut, wholeness. Ken yehi ratzon.
And thank you so much, Rabbi Aronson, for this rich learning. There's no shortage of ways that all of us are in need of healing in this moment. And what a blessing to learn how to think creatively about how we can show up for one another and for ourselves. If this is learning that you're interested in continuing as a community, please let us know. Be in touch with myself or Rabbi Mack. We want to continue to support this sort of conversation and learn with Emily and from Emily's wisdom for many more text iterations to come. Rabbi Mack or Cantor Supplement, any announcements for today?
I would just agree. We're also blessed. Thank you, Yasher Koach. That was just beautiful and very powerful to receive that blessing. And we're blessed to have Rabbi Heather Shore with us also, and look forward to continuing this conversation in ways we have not yet discovered. And so we'll look forward to hear your voices to see where that journey takes us. So thank you to Emily and to Heather and to all of you. For joining with us. It's beautiful to be together on this Shabbat, and thank you for that beautiful Torah.
Thank you.
Shalom.
Thank you, Rabbi. Beautiful.
Thank you.